Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan.
Welcome to Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider the news of the day. Of course, there are two big stories of the day. Globally, we've got Iran's missile attack, and then locally, that explosive press conference by the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission this morning. So we're going to come back to the MACC tapes shortly, but first let's discuss the implications of Iran's retaliation for the US killing of General Qasem Soleimani. Now, more than a dozen missiles were launched from Iran and struck two housing forces in Iraq today. Now, it's unclear if there had been any casualties, but Sharaad, this ratcheting up of tensions between the two countries is bound to have implications for the rest of the world.
Right. Melissa, you know, of course, Iran is saying that this attack was proportionate. Some are saying that it was designed, in fact, not to create a lot of American casualties, but to respond, as it were, in kind for the attack and the killing of a major figure in Iranian politics and in its military establishment. So there's that. The question is now, the ball is in the American court, because America being a democracy, unlike Iran, there's much more open chatter about the strategies moving forward. Hawks and those, the hawkish members of the American establishment wanting a continuation, perhaps an escalation. And then, of course, on the other side, people, Americans, asking, you know, whether the prerogatives of Congress have been usurped by the presidency, right. Because according to some, including the head of the Foreign Relations Committee, that the prerogative to go to war is with Congress, not with the president. Okay, so that, I guess now people are looking back at whether the president of the US made a somewhat impulsive decision, which made the US and the region more, I guess, more or less safe, and that's the question that most pundits are asking today. I also want to take a quick look at the missile strike in Iran. I mean, the Iran strikes were heavy on symbolism. I just want to point out that the missiles were launched at about 1:30 in the morning in Iraq, and that is roughly around the same time the drone strike killed Soleimani on Friday morning. I think that's important. Also, if you look at the top Iranian officials, they were tweeting out flags, the pictures of the Iranian flag, and that was similar to what Donald Trump did following the first reports of the killing. And finally, I think it's important for us to verify whether, in fact, there had been any US casualties of the attacks, because it appears that the attacks were very carefully coordinated to ensure that it was fired at bases that were already on heavy alert, therefore minimizing the loss of human life. All right, that's one development that we're going to be keeping our eye on. It's going to be a developing story. But of course, coming back home, the other big news of the day, MACC today released audio recordings of several telephone conversations involving former Prime Minister Datuk Sri Najib Razak, this relating to the 1MDB scandal. Now, all the conversations took place between January and July of 2016. Among them were several calls between Najib and former MACC chief Tan Sri Zulkifli Ahmad. Others included conversations between Najib and high-ranking individuals from the UAE. These were concerning the US Department of Justice's 1MDB civil forfeiture suits and funds channeled to Najib's stepson, Riza Aziz. There was also a recording of a conversation between Najib and his wife, Datin Sri Rosmah Mansor. Now, let's play an excerpt of this July 27th of 2016 conversation between Najib and Rosmah.
Hi. Hello. Can I advise you? Can I advise you something?
Yeah, hang on. Okay, anything?
No. You please don't listen to me. You know why? They tell you to slow down on Abu Qasim. And Abu Qasim is making statement all based on Vienna Convention and and we are making him looking like a hero. And you are the villain, see? And all these five people, can they see that their first priority is you, not anybody else? Jangan je office lah, Shahlan dah convince Tengku, dah convince Amhari, dah convince, you know, like you, kita ni semua villain, you know?
No. I allowed Azwan to make the statement dah impact dah bagus dah.
Azwar, okay, fine. Now, today Abu Qasim in berita, why is it that they allow Abu Qasim to ambil gambar dengan Pak Lah lagi? And he got the cheek to take Pak Lah and everybody else except you, okay? That's not fair. So please, Darin, just
understand.
Go by you.
No, I've already signed a letter for Zul's appointment.
Yes, and Abu Zahar can make, let's say, must be for because they have lobbied, see? We know they have lobbied.
Abu Zahar jangan buat statement, biarlah.
Yeah, but Abu Zahar dalam pencarian, does he know what he's talking about or not?
Itulah dia.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I don't like this. Then you are the Prime Minister, you should take in charge, not anybody else, okay?
Yeah, I understand.
So that was an excerpt of the conversation between Najib and Rosmah. And I have to say, while the term "can I advise you something" is trending on Twitter, it's become a bit of a meme and it's gone viral. I think what we need to do is break down the contents of this clip. Sharaad, what do you think about it?
Well, I mean, there are many kind of responses, and I think you'd have to be on planet Mars if you've missed this. But the question is, I think one of the things that makes this fascinating is that we know, of course, that political leaders are human beings, and they will talk like a normal human being.
Yeah,
this is clear.
That's marriage, for you.
Yes, and actually Najib and Rosmah were a kind of power couple, and she herself was an extraordinarily forceful character during the Najib administration on many occasions, pushing herself out in front when in the past the spouses of prime ministers actually played a more background kind of role. And so she was an extraordinary figure. I think for all kinds of reasons this is fascinating stuff, not least for what it shows in terms of evidence of levels of perhaps collusion, alleged collusion, corruption, misuse of government machinery, or gang pressing actually government civil servants to protect the private interests of these individuals. So for all those reasons, Melissa, I think this is going to be very interesting as it unfolds.
Definitely so. I think, and I believe Rosmah and Najib have responded to this. According to Rosmah, her lawyers will be looking into this, and Najib has said that his lawyers are also considering a suit against MACC and Latifah Koya, chief of MACC. Najib has also suggested that the timing of the release of these clips had something to do with the Kimanis by-election in Sabah, January 18th.
Well, I'm not quite sure if Sabahans really care that much about what's happening in the peninsula, but let's put it, the other response that Najib had was that this was releasing, conversations between heads of state or leaders of governments would actually have a fallout in diplomatic terms. But what we now hear from these tapes, Melissa, at least if this is in fact authentic, is the attempt by Najib Razak, the alleged attempt to get a foreign power to fabricate documentation in order to protect his stepson, which of course would then compromise the Malaysian government in its dealings with the UAE.
And on that note, here's a clip between Datuk Seri Najib Razak and the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan.
I also have this personal request, Your Highness. Yes. That relates to Riza, my son. Yes. And his movie. You see, the problem is relatively small. If there can be an agreement with Sheikh Mansour to have a loan agreement signed, and he will pay back according to the schedule, that will show that it's a legitimate, financing package. It's not money laundering, you see. At the moment, he's under a bit of pressure in America, and we're worried about him in case they make him the scapegoat, you see. I would appreciate was the big package looks positive. We can find a solution, I believe. I would appreciate if that agreement can be signed quickly with Sheikh Mansour or whoever is designated by Sheikh Mansour, so that he can begin to pay back. He's paid back some. He continues to pay back. so that it would appear as legitimate loan agreement, which it is, you see.
There you go. Now, at that press conference earlier today, MACC Chief Latifah Koya had said that to quote her, there is a new set of offences that took place based on these recordings, and based on our expertise, we can see elements of abuse of power. This should not happen. The question is whether we might see more charges for Najib and Rosmah, who are, I think, both currently facing Najib 42 charges and Rosmah 20 charges, respectively. All right, so we're going to come back and take a closer look at the legal implications of the MACC tapes. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Hello, welcome back to Consider This. Melisa and Sharaad here with you. Now, earlier today, the MACC revealed a series of 9 audio recordings of high-ranking officials, including former Prime Minister Datuk Seri Najib Razak, alleging that there was a, quote, criminal conspiracy at the highest level, unquote. To discuss this further, we have joining us on the line Shahrizan Johan, civil liberties lawyer. Thank you for joining us this evening, Shah. Now, my first question to you is a comment that the MACC Chief Latifah Koya said. She said that the recordings were revealed to the media and to the public because it concerned an issue of public interest. Now, in your opinion, do you think that the MACC should have played these recordings so publicly? Could it affect perhaps the ongoing trial?
I think in terms of affecting the ongoing trials, I think we must look at the recordings. And if we listen to those recordings, it would appear that they are recordings of things which happen after the fact, meaning after, whatever alleged crime has occurred, and, this is the fallout to those events. So as far as I'm concerned, what is happening right now, or the charges right now, are relating to the alleged crime itself. So I don't think that any of these recordings would actually interfere with the ongoing trials as it stands right now. They may, however, reveal, if the public prosecutor feels that there's something there, but they may reveal new offences of which those involved can be charged with.
Shah,
as for whether
please go ahead.
It should be revealed, I think I agree completely with Latifah, because when it comes to something which is in the public interest, the public needs to know, and we have actually seen MACC having press conferences updating about what they have done and what they have discovered and so on and so forth. So this is nothing extraordinary. It's just perhaps the substance is shocking and cause quite a stir. But in terms of actually updating the public, I don't see anything wrong with what MACC has done.
Sure, there's a question, and this is an expression, a legal expression that's bandied about perhaps a little too freely, sub judice. There's people saying that they've characterized what the MACC has done as sub judice. What's your opinion on that?
I disagree. I think I think we must remember that when you talk about sub judice, it's something which will interfere with the trial. Now, in Malaysia, we don't have jury trials. We have judges deciding, and judges decide based on the evidence presented in court. So I don't see how these recordings, which were played in public, would have any impact on the trial itself. That's number one. Number two, as I mentioned, these are recordings which appear to have been made after the alleged crime has occurred, after the, supposedly 1MDB monies were stolen or SRC monies and all these things. So it seems to be about the fallout of the controversy that has erupted. So I don't think any of these recordings would be of use either for the prosecution or for the defense for the ongoing trials. Right. Again, they may reveal new charges, and that's something completely separate.
Shah, I take it like us, you two have been, riveted by the 9 audio recordings. Now, in your opinion, which part was the most damning or potentially most damning?
I think there has been instances in these recordings where, someone who is purportedly the former MACC chief, Zulkifli, who was revealing to Datuk Sri Najib about the investigation papers and so on and so forth. And I don't think that is proper. I think that is a clear instance of interference with the administration of justice. And also, of course, there's also talk, which the recording which you have played, about, trying to make it appear to the Department of Justice in the US that, there's nothing wrong with the monies are legitimate to show that there's no money laundering or whatever. And I think this relates to the investigations in the US. So these are things which, to me, appear, raises question about whether, crimes have been committed. We don't know whether, how they were obtained and so on and so forth. So we have to put that aside. But, if you ask my personal opinion, hearing the recording, those would be the ones which may reveal certain improprieties at play.
Sure. Speaking of the question of how they were obtained, is that crucial to the use of this as evidence? If, say, new charges are filed and this is preferred as evidence, will the nature of the recordings, who did it, when it was done, so on and so forth, matter?
Not really, because unless there is a specific prohibition, generally, evidence which were obtained, without the knowledge of the other person is admissible in court. And of course, the burden is on the prosecution to basically prove how they were obtained, who recorded it, and so on and so forth. And this is a burden that is not easily discharged by the prosecution, especially if it is done anonymously. They need to be able to identify that, the people who in those recordings are actually people who are named. But although it does appear that Datuk Sri Najib himself has basically confirmed that some of the recordings are genuine because he seems to have responded to some of it as if they are real. But at the end of the day, it requires the public prosecutor to prove that, these recordings were obtained. So it's not a matter of the recording need to be obtained in a legal manner. It's a matter of proving that the recordings were indeed recording about these phone conversations.
Right. Shah, you've also commented publicly that it's not only legal for the Malaysian government to tap phone conversations, but it was also Najib Razak's administration that made it so. Could you elaborate a little bit on the law surrounding phone tapping, the circumstances that allow for it?
Okay. If we look at Section 116C of the Criminal Procedure Code, it allows the public prosecutor to basically authorize the police to intercept, listen, or record any conversation by communication if the public prosecutor considers that information is likely contains information relating to the commission of an offence. And Section 116C also provides that such information, if it is obtained through this manner, is also admissible in court. This is the general sort of power given to the police. Whether this was the case in terms of the recordings, I do not know, because, again, we do not know how the recordings were made. Whether there was any authorization by the public prosecutor for it to fall under the ambit of 116C, we're not sure. So to say that, in this particular instance, it falls under 116C, it's at this point we can't say that conclusively. But yes, as a general rule, the police do have these powers, and that's why I say it's been ironic because it was Najib's administration which introduced these powers to the police. Before this, it was only the MACC who had such powers. Under the MACC Act, they had powers to basically intercept communication. But Najib's administration in 2012 widen the power to give police the power for any offence, regardless of whether it's under the MECC Act or any criminal offence at all. So to me, it is ironic that now, you have a situation where the former Prime Minister had his phone basically tapped while he was a sitting Prime Minister, and now we're seeing it. So the administration which allowed the police to legally spy on you, the head of it has now been revealed to have been the so-called victim of phone tapping.
Right. Ironic indeed. Thank you so much for speaking with us tonight, Shah. We'll be back with more on Consider This. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Consider This. Melisa and Sharaad here with you. Here's what we want you to consider tonight. Now, a couple of days ago, Tan Sri Kamal Saleh tendered his resignation as the chairman of University Malaysia Sarawak, or better known as UNIMAS. This comes after the Sarawak government had said Putrajaya did not consult it regarding the appointment. It was also made known that the preference for the position is for someone who is local. So what we want you to consider tonight is whether or not having a local criteria for appointments has any benefits.
Well, Melisa, I guess, when it comes to a variety of things, locals might know better when it comes to, how to kind of determine their lives and make decisions. But when it comes to universities and especially leadership for academic institutions, is the local criterion really that valid? Sure. There was lack of consultation. Sure, this was done a year or more before the actual current chair steps down. There are all kinds of problems around it, but is the fact that Kamal Saleh, a well-known and respected economist, not the right person for the job just because he comes from the peninsula?
Well, okay, so, I think that's also that symbolic sense, right? The sense of ownership. To have a local person into this post would mean that there was, there can be a sense of ownership. I think there was also a comment made by SUPP Women's Wing saying that, questioning the interests of Sarawakians would perhaps be the top priority if the chairman was a non-Sarawakian.
Yeah, but you can also make the argument, Melisa, that that in terms of universities, priorities and the policies are the ones that are actually going to shape the direction of the university,
right.
Not just the personality, or in this case, the identity of those people leading. So, can Sarawakian interests still be maintained? Yes, sure, why not? Even if the person isn't Sarawakian, as long as the policies are very clear.
I'm also thinking that perhaps there could be, good people in Sarawak's thinking this, that they have good people who are more than qualified for the role, and perhaps the lack of consultation was the one that rubbed them the wrong way. All right, that's all the time we have on this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, with me, Sharaad Kuttan, signing off for tonight. Thank you for watching, and good night.